Hello, everyone, and namaskar. Today I will continue with the reading of Ananda Marga Elementary Philosophy, Chapter 2, and this discourse is titled, What is the Cosmic Entity? It has been established that Brahma exists, and also that it is Paramatman, Bhuma Chaitanya, universal consciousness, or consciousness in its totality. Bhuma Chaitanya, or cosmic consciousness, or consciousness in its totality, is also known as Chiti Shakti, or Purusha. It was also explained earlier that Prakriti is a principle or a unique energy or force of Purusha, consciousness, and that she also qualifies Purusha. Prakriti is a principle of Purusha, and she is always so intimately bound up with him, and that it is impossible to separate the two. They are inseparable, like fire and its burning property. Just as these two cannot be separated, Purusha and Prakriti can also never be separated. Prakriti is a unique force, the qualifying principle of Purusha. A force or principle which gives something a characteristic or property cannot be separated from it. Similarly, although Purusha and Prakriti are two distinct entities, they cannot be separated. So Purusha is bound to be present wherever there is Prakriti, and the collective term for them is Brahma. Purusha we know as Jnana, Chaitanya, or consciousness. From these terms, we can understand the existence of something, but cannot visualize any figure or form. We can only form an idea of Purusha or Chaitanya with the help of our bhavana, introversial flow of our objective mind. So Purusha or Chaitanya is an abstract entity and can be appreciated by our mind only in objective expression. Prakriti, the qualifying principle of this abstract entity, can also only be understood as an energy, force, or principle which cannot be seen even though it qualifies the crudest of things. Its form or shape cannot be described. Fire is a crude object, and its attribute, the burning principle, is also a crude quality. Yet even this attribute cannot be seen. However crude the attribute of a thing may be, it will always be subtle in form. An energy or principle can never have a shape. It cannot be seen or heard. Prakriti, also a unique force, a principle, is a subtle entity. Purusha and Prakriti are both subtle. Brahma, the collective name for these two, is also subtle, and can only be appreciated in the final stage of the mind's merger in its source. Brahma could not, therefore, have any form or shape. It would not be possible to describe it or even to say what it looks like. Brahma must be shapeless or formless. It really cannot have a form. It was said earlier that Buddhitattva comes into being as a result of the influence of the Sattva Guna of Prakriti, or the unit consciousness, or Atman. Ahang Tattva is formed due to the influence of Rajaguna, or Buddhi Tattva. And lastly, Chitta is the result of the influence of Tamaguna on Ahang Tattva. The formation of Chitta is dependent on Ahang Tattva, as it comes into being only as a result of the influence of Tamaguna on Ahang Tattva. The existence of Chitta is, therefore, not independent. If the Tamaguna of Prakriti does not influence Ahang Tattva, or if Ahang Tattva ceases to exist, Chitta cannot be formed. But the absence of Chitta would not mean the absence of Ahang Tattva in Prakriti. It only means that the Tamaguna of Prakriti is not influence Ahang Tattva, and that the existence of Ahang Tattva does not depend on the presence or absence of Chitta. It is independent of Chitta. If we apply the same reasoning to Ahang Tattva, we can see that it is dependent on the influence of the Rajaguna of Prakriti over Buddhi Tattva. But the existence of Buddhi Tattva does not depend on the presence or absence of Ahang Tattva. Buddhi Tattva is independent of Ahang Tattva. Similarly, the existence of Buddhi Tattva depends on the influence of the Sattva Guna of Prakriti, or unit consciousness. But the existence of unit consciousness is independent of Buddhi Tattva. For example, steel can be molded to form a steel pan, but that does not mean that if the pan does not exist, steel will also not exist. As the pan is made of steel, it is dependent on steel, but the steel would exist even if there were no pan. The existence of steel is therefore independent of the existence of the pan. Similarly, unit consciousness is independent of Buddhi Tattva. All the different forms from Chitta to Bodhitattva are dependent on unit consciousness, as the existence of each one of these is dependent on the other. But when it comes to consciousness, we can see that its existence is not dependent on any of these forms. In fact, we cannot find anything on which the existence of consciousness depends. Consciousness is therefore absolutely independent. Consciousness or Purusha is absolutely independent. It was seen in the preceding paragraph that it is not dependent on anything and has no beginning or root cause. It is non-causal. Prakriti is the qualifying principle of Purusha and is bound to be present wherever Purusha exists. This, however, does not mean that Prakriti has been created by Purusha. The burning quality of fire is its qualifying principle and always exists wherever there is fire. Yet this quality has not been created by fire. Just as fire cannot create its qualifying principle, Purusha also cannot create Prakriti, his qualifying principle. Purusha is even incapable of realizing his own existence without the qualifying influence of Prakriti. Such a Purusha can surely never create Prakriti. Just as in the case of Purusha, the origin of or cause for the creation of Prakriti cannot be found. Prakriti is also non-causal. Purusha and Prakriti are those both non-causal. Brahma is the combined name for Purusha and Prakriti. Hence, Brahma is certainly non-causal. Brahma is without any beginning or root cause. It has no origin. But does Brahma have an end? If it does, we should find out how big it is. In order to find this out, we will have to measure Brahma. Different instruments are required to measure different things. For instance, to measure land, we need rods and chains. To measure food grains, we require scales and weights. We have to use a thermometer to measure temperature and a barometer to measure atmospheric pressure. The instrument required depends on the nature of the thing to be measured. Brahma is subtle and is only an ideological expression, as we already have seen. The instrument required to measure Brahma has to be subtle. Something subtler than Brahma must be found to measure it. All matter in this world can be classified into 5 fundamental factors or tattvas. It may exist as Akasha, ethereal, Vayu, aerial, Agni, luminous, Jala, liquid, or Chiti, solid. The presence of tanmatras distinguishes something crude from something subtle. A crude thing will always have tanmatras, while a subtle thing will not have any. So anything containing a larger number of tanmatras will be cruder. There are 5 tanmatras: Shabda, sound; Sparsha, touch; Rupa, form; Rasa, taste; and Gandha, smell. Akasha, or the ethereal factor, or the supposed subtle atmosphere beyond the atmospheres of the planets, etc., contains nothing which can be visualized, yet it carries Shabda Tanmatra, and it's called crude. Vayu has 2 Tanmatras, Shabda and Sparsha. That is, Vayu carries sound and may also be felt. Vayu is thus cruder than Akasha. Agni, Jala, and Chiti are all still cruder, as they can be seen. They have Rupa Tanmatra, in addition to the other Tanmatras. Therefore, all the 5 rudimental factors, or tattvas, in which matter can exist are crude. None of these could make an instrument subtle enough to measure Brahma, which is a subtle entity. In these 5 rudimental factors, that is, Akasha, Vayu, Agni, Jala, and Chiti, there is another element present apart from matter. This other element is mind, or Antakarana, introversial psychic force. Applying the same test to mind as we did to Tanmatras, we find that mind is subtle. Only mind can be abstract. It cannot be found to contain any Tanmatras. That is, mind alone is subtle, and everything else in this universe is crude. Mind, therefore, is the only thing out of which an instrument for measuring Brahma can be prepared. But since mind has no Tanmatras, no crude or physical form can be attributed to it. It cannot be heard, touched, seen, tasted, or even smelt. In the absence of these qualities, an instrument cannot be made out of mind. Mind is subtle and only has the qualities of grasping an idea, thinking, and feeling. These are the ways mind can measure Brahma. Mind is made up of Buddhi Tattva, Ahang Tattva, and Chitta. Buddhi Tattva is formed by Prakriti, qualifying unit consciousness. Aham Tattva comes into being due to the further influence of Prakriti over Buddhi Tattva. Similarly, Chitta comes into existence being qualified by Prakriti. Aham Tattva is the part of the mind which works. The capacity to perform any action is only Aham Tattva. Hence, if Brahma is to be measured by the mind, it will have to be done by Aham Tattva. Buddhi Tattva separates unit consciousness and Aham Tattva. Aham Tattva will thus not be able to reach unit consciousness unless it passes through Buddhi Tattva. But Aham Tattva is only a functional form of Buddhi Tattva. The I of I exist of Buddhi Tattva becomes Aham Tattva when it adopts the function of I work. The moment Aham Tattva reverts to Buddhi Tattva, the functional identity of I work of Aham Tattva ceases to exist. Aham Tattva cannot merge in unit consciousness as Aham Tattva. It must be converted into Buddhi Tattva before coming into contact with unit consciousness. And in that state, it cannot perform any function, far less that of measuring unit consciousness. As mind is incapable of coming in contact with unit consciousness, it can never measure it. Brahma is the collective name for all the unit consciousnesses. Mind cannot measure a single unit consciousness. So the question of measuring the supreme multiple of all the multiplicities of unit consciousness does not arise. Mind can never think, feel, or grasp any idea of the size of Brahma. Mind can only determine the boundaries of something which is within its scope. It cannot set limits to a thing which is beyond its reach. The creation is only a part of Brahma. This will be explained in the following chapter. Mind exists within this creation. On withdrawing mind, Aham Tattva, to its limits, we will find something left beyond it, which it has no capacity to comprehend. Creation thus extends beyond the limits of mind. It is infinite. Creation is only a part of Brahma. And if a part can be infinite, Brahma, the whole, is bound to be infinite. The combined name for Purusha and Prakriti is Brahma. It was seen earlier that both Purusha and Prakriti are non-causal. Naturally, if they are both non-causal, it means that they are also independent of each other. Neither of them is subordinate to the other. The state of Brahma, where both Purusha and Prakriti are independent because they are non-causal, is the supreme state of Brahma, or Brahma Swarupa. Prakriti is a principle or a unique force, the function of which is to attribute guna or to qualify Purusha. Guna ordinarily means an attribute or a qualification. In Sanskrit, guna means a rope used for tying something. To attribute guna means to bind with a rope. Prakriti qualifying or attributing guna to Purusha means Prakriti is binding Purusha with a rope and driving Purusha according to her designs and wishes. But in the supreme state of Brahma Swarupa, Purusha is independent. Hence, Prakriti cannot qualify or bring Purusha under bondage. Still, Prakriti exists there with Purusha, as Brahma is a combined name for them. Those asleep are incapable of using their faculties or capacity to work. They are inactive in that stage, yet they still have capacity to work. Similarly, Prakriti is inactive in Brahma Swarupa. She does not perform functions or is unable to perform them. The function of Prakriti is to qualify or to attribute guna to Purusha. Purusha does not acquire any attributes or qualifications when Prakriti does not function. Then he is beyond guna or without guna. How is it that Prakriti, whose only function is to qualify Purusha, does not influence or is unable to qualify Purusha in Nirguna Brahma? There can only be two reasons for this. Prakriti is either asleep and hence inactive, or is weaker than Purusha and is thus unable to bind Purusha. If we accept the first probability, we will have to admit that Prakriti is asleep in Nirguna Brahma, or Brahma Swarupa. But Prakriti does not qualify Brahma at some stage. If she is in the state of sleep in Nirguna Brahma, someone will have to wake her up so that she may qualify Purusha. In Nirguna Brahma, there are only Purusha and Prakriti. There is no other entity, so only Purusha can do it. But Purusha, we know, is even incapable of realizing his own existence without being qualified by Prakriti. How can he then perform the function of awakening Prakriti? We have therefore to dismiss the possibility of Prakriti being asleep in Nirguna Brahma. Otherwise, in the absence of any other entity, it would not be possible to rouse Prakriti, to qualify Purusha, and to manifest him as Buddhi Tattva. Prakriti is awake even in Nirguna Brahma. She is not asleep. The quality, dharma, or function of Prakriti is to qualify Purusha. And if she is awake in Nirguna Brahma, she must qualify Purusha. Purusha in Nirguna Brahma is not qualified in spite of the presence of Prakriti, fully awake. That Prakriti is weaker than Purusha in Nirguna Brahma can be the only reason for this. She is less powerful and so is unable to qualify Purusha. This is how Prakriti and Purusha have existed in Brahma for eternity. Purusha, therefore, is by nature more powerful than Prakriti and is the transcendental entity, and Prakriti is the innate principle. The state where Prakriti is feebler than Purusha and is incapable of influencing or qualifying Purusha is the state of Nirguna Brahma, or Brahma Swarupa. That is, the state where Purusha in Brahma is not metamorphosed. In the state of Brahma, where Purusha is not influenced or qualified by Prakriti, and hence Purusha in Brahma remains unexpressed, Purusha is called Nirguna Purusha, non-qualified consciousness. And where Purusha is influenced and qualified by Prakriti, he is called Saguna, or Guna Yukta Purusha, or the qualified consciousness. Saguna Brahma is therefore that stage of Brahma where Purusha is influenced and qualified by Prakriti. This gives rise to two questions. First, if Nirguna Brahma is the Brahma Swarupa, or the supreme stage of Brahma, then what could be Saguna Brahma? Secondly, if Purusha is more powerful than nature, how could he be influenced and qualified by Prakriti in Saguna Brahma? In other words, the question is how Saguna Brahma came into being. Nirguna and Saguna are only two different states of Brahma. In the Nirguna state, Purusha and Prakriti both exist together, but Prakriti is not able to qualify Purusha. In the Saguna state, also Purusha and Prakriti exist together, but here Prakriti influences and qualifies Purusha. It is because of this difference in the relationship between Purusha and Prakriti that the former is called Nirguna and the latter is called Saguna Brahma. Rama asleep and Rama awake only indicate the two different states of existence of the same person. It does not mean that they are two different persons. Similarly, Nirguna and Saguna Brahma are two different states of the same Brahma. It was concluded earlier that Bodhitattva comes into being as soon as unit consciousness is qualified by Prakriti. Bhuma Chaitanya, Paramapurusha, or cosmic consciousness, is only a collective name for an infinite number of unit consciousnesses. Paramapurusha must also follow the same principles or dharma as unit consciousness. The properties of the two must be the same, the only difference being that the scope of unit consciousness is finite, while that of cosmic consciousness is infinite. This must therefore mean that creation comes into existence as soon as cosmic consciousness or Paramapurusha is influenced and qualified by Prakriti. The stage where Purusha is qualified by Prakriti is Saguna Brahma. The universe is created because of Saguna Brahma. We have to accept the existence of Saguna Brahma, as this creation which is formed from or which comes into being because of Saguna Brahma can be seen at every moment of one's existence. This also shows that Prakriti influences and qualifies Purusha in Saguna Brahma. There can only be two conditions under which Prakriti might influence Purusha. Either Prakriti in Saguna Brahma is stronger than in Nirguna, or Purusha in Saguna is feebler than Prakriti. Prakriti, we know, is a special principle or unique force. She is present with the same intensity everywhere. She can be compared to any crude energy, for example, electricity. An electric current running through a mile-long wire will measure 440 volts at every point on the wire. The voltage will not be different at different points. Similarly, Prakriti as a unique force will always be present with the same strength everywhere. The question of her being more powerful in Saguna Brahma does not arise. Purusha in Saguna Brahma must then be weaker than Prakriti, or else he cannot be influenced by Prakriti. Purusha is condensed, as well as less condensed, in the infinite Brahma. The consciousness of the infinite Brahma is not the same everywhere. Prakriti qualifies Purusha, finding him feeble wherever consciousness or Purusha is less condensed. And as a result of this, creation springs forth. Prakriti is helpless and cannot qualify Purusha where consciousness is condensed. Purusha is unqualified there and is called Nirguna Brahma, the unqualified cosmic entity. Brahma is infinite, and its supreme state is Nirguna. Wherever the infinite Purusha consciousness in Nirguna Brahma is less condensed, he is influenced by Prakriti, and we find Saguna Brahma. Surely then, Saguna Brahma is within Nirguna, like a huge iceberg in an ocean. Due to imbalance in climatic conditions, a part of the ocean gets frozen into an iceberg, but the rest of the water remains in its original state. In the same way, wherever, owing to the influence of Prakriti over Purusha, he is less condensed in Nirguna Brahma. He is qualified and becomes Saguna Brahma, but the rest remains Nirguna. Saguna Brahma, therefore, is within Nirguna Brahma. Saguna Purusha, or qualified consciousness, is within Nirguna, or non-qualified consciousness. Where Purusha is qualified by Prakriti, it is called Saguna. We have seen earlier that the supreme state of Brahma, or Brahma Swarupa, is unqualified consciousness. Saguna Brahma, or qualified consciousness, is therefore not the supreme state of Brahma Swarupa. Yet it has to be called Brahma, as both Purusha and Prakriti are present. What Saguna Brahma is can be explained by taking again the example of an iceberg in an ocean. Due to variation in the climatic conditions, some of the water of the ocean changes into an iceberg. If we compare the ocean with Nirguna Brahma, the iceberg may be compared with Saguna Brahma. The ice is comparable to Purusha in Saguna Brahma, and the climate which freezes the water to Prakriti. The unfrozen water of the ocean stands for Purusha in Nirguna Brahma. The ice and the unchanged water of the ocean are two different forms of water only. The only difference being that climate at some places is able to change it into ice, while in other parts of the ocean, the climate cannot change it into ice. Ice is only a changed form of water, but we cannot call it water. It has to be accepted as a changed form of water only. Similarly, we cannot call Saguna Brahma the supreme state of Brahma or Brahma Swarupa. It is only another state of Brahma Swarupa. Hence, for the realization of Brahma Swarupa, or the supreme state of Brahma, we shall have to know Nirguna Brahma. The mere realization of Saguna Brahma will not lead us to the realization of the supreme state, for it is only another status of the supreme rank. What then is Bhagavan, Saguna, or Nirguna? Bhagavan is a Sanskrit word derived Bhaga, prefix Matup. That is, the one who has Bhaga is Bhagavan. Bhaga means absolute power, benevolence, and light. Bhagavan, therefore, is that which is the most luminous, benevolent, and omnipotent. Jyotirmaya, Mangalamaya, and Sarva Shaktiman. So Bhagavan has these attributes or qualifications. Bhagavan thus is qualified Purusha, Gunayukta. In Nirguna Brahma, Purusha is not qualified. He is qualified in Saguna Brahma. Thus Bhagavan is only Saguna Brahma. It is Nirguna Brahma which is the supreme state of Brahma or Brahma Swarupa. Brahma is only its other status. Hence, Bhagavan is not the realization of Brahma Swarupa or the supreme state. To know Brahma Swarupa, one has to step beyond Bhagavan and has to realize Nirguna Brahma. It is that entity which is to be attained. Thank you.